Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Next Door NetAdmin. So I just got finished, like literally within the last day, with moving a bunch of data from one TrueNAS unit to another for a customer. And it was a big move. Lots of data sets, which, SMB file shares, and more importantly, a lot of ZVols that were being used for iSCSI for virtual machine storage with Hyper-V. So I thought, since I just got finished with this entire process, that I would share some of my insights and things that I've learned from going through the entire process. No particular order, and I'm not demonstrating them today because not all of them are technical for a start, but who knows? If this is something that you would like to see me demonstrate technically, then by all means, let me know right down there in the comments section, just to start off with, and I'll see what I can do about putting together a demo environment so that I can actually demonstrate some of, what I did. But first thing is, ask for support when you need it. Now, in this case, yes, it's a paid TrueNAS system with the enterprise software, so I can actually do that. And you might not be able to do that if you're doing this in a home lab environment or a personal environment. But if you have support available for all of us working with commercial units, ask for support. But, and here is the catch with that, don't count on support either, for various reasons. In my case, while I was working with somebody at TrueNAS who understands the newer scale-based TrueNAS units, they do not understand the older core-based units. And I needed to bring some of my own expertise to that to look at log entries and go, this thing that you said is unnecessary and leave it blank is actually required, and that's why the behavior's not working. So I think we're going to need to, add things here. It's good to have support, and I'm glad to have had support, but don't rely on it 100%. You need to keep your own brain engaged on it too. That's just part of being a network admin, keeping your own brain engaged. Other things that I have learned. I already knew that ZFS replication works on snapshots. And I knew that this means that you can do an initial replication and then you can just do incremental replications after that because you're just going from snapshot to snapshot. You're not having to do the full file system every single time. What I didn't realize is that there are some things that it may or may not replicate correctly. When I replicated the data sets over, all the data's there. I can see that all the permissions are there in the file system. But for whatever reason, I wasn't able to access them over SMB, even after sharing it out. TrueNAS told me that the right way to do this was to create a data set, share it out, and then replicate over top of it. I did that. I also went and did a couple of replications just straight, letting the replication task create the destination data set, and then just sharing that out. But what I found is that my data set on the core-based system, when I had set it to be SMB, had set the ACLs accordingly, and they were set so that, the only option that I could see there is ACL mode was restricted. And there were two options, restricted and pass-through, and it was set in restricted. Okay, fine. When it replicated into the scale-based system, for whatever reason, it did replicate all of the data, but the permissions, the ACL type, there's an option that wasn't available in the core-based system. On scale, the ACL type was POSIX by default because it inherited from the top level, the tank, the pool, and it inherited POSIX permission types. But that's not what it was needed for the actual permissions to be recognized by Samba. So I had to change the ACL type to SMB/NFSv4. And then I saw that the ACL mode was also set to inherit, and that wasn't working for me. So I had to set the ACL type to SMB and then set the ACL mode to restricted, same as it was before. Once I did that and then stopped and restarted Samba, the service, then all my permissions were there, which was great because in a corporate environment, there are loads of permissions that have been built up over time. And while I could go through and redo all of those from scratch, I really didn't want to. So that was a good thing is, okay, so I'm going to replicate my data set over. All the permissions are going to come over too, but they're not necessarily going to be interpreted by the receiving system in the same way that they were on the source system. So fortunately, and it tells you when you change the ACL type from POSIX to SMB, it says, this is a destructive operation. It's gonna, erase a bunch of stuff. And I'm like, if this erases all of the permissions, then I have a copy on the other system. I can match what it was before, but that's gonna be a lot of effort. Fortunately, I didn't have to do that. Yay. On the same or a similar note, when you're replicating, by default, it will make the data sets on the receiving system read-only. And obviously that's not great if you're replicating data that's going to go onto a live system. So I had to make sure that, okay, I'm going to replicate that. I was okay leaving it read-only in the run-up to the big migration when I'm doing initial replications and then incremental replications on top of that. I don't want people using the new system yet. I want them using the old system. So leaving the new system as read-only was fine. But then when I did the final transfer, go through, set the new system to read-write, and set the old system to read-only, so that people can't accidentally use the old one. They have to go use the new one in order to actually save their work going forward. That's just to keep things clean. Replicating ZVols is a slightly different story. Now, I've talked in the past about how taking a snapshot of a data set really only creates a snapshot with the data that is actually in the data set. Whereas taking a snapshot of a ZVol requires the space of the entire ZVol. And because replication works based on snapshots, I was thinking, okay, so I'm going to have to take a snapshot, and then I'm going to have to replicate the full size of that snapshot over to the receiving system. And it turned out that's not what happened. I was amazed. ZFS is intelligent enough, even though it doesn't know what the file system is on this block device. It's an opaque black box of a device. It still knows what blocks have been changed from their initial state. Okay, so if it's initialized the entire block device to whatever, and Windows has, put a partition on it, formatted it with NTFS or whatever, ZFS has been tracking which blocks are changing in that block device. And so when I replicated the snapshot, which, remember, because of the ref reservation property, has the entire size, let's say 1.5 terabytes. It's a 1.5 terabyte ZVol when I've created a 1.5 terabyte snapshot of it, but it only had to transmit 400 gigabytes because that's the only blocks that's the blocks that have changed in this entire device sum up to 400 gigabytes. And I did a little more thinking on that. I'm like, but I have 800 gigs of virtual machine hard drives in here. how is it only 400 gigs? And I go, well, think about this for a little bit. There's a lot of systems, and this is a hunch on my part. This is not a hard and fast rule. But my hunch is that all of the systems involved are doing their part to build things that are compressing more and more at each step. Hyper-V, when you're creating a fixed hard drive, yes, the file size is this. You have allocated 200 gigs of hard drive in a single file. But that's not 200 gigs of live data. That is 200 gigs of zeros and maybe 40 gigs of data to start. Okay. Well, zeros, an entire zero for, all zeros for 160 gigs of this 200 gig file compresses really well. So when that gets written as 200 gig file into a ZFS ZVol over iSCSI, perhaps it's saying, I want to have 160 gigs of zeros, but ZFS isn't having to actually write 160 gigs of zeros. It's only writing the 40 gigs of data that's changed. And then when you take the snapshot, it says, okay, well, I've only got 40 gigs of data in this 40 gigs worth of changes. Again, ZFS doesn't know what you've put in this block device, but I've got 40 gigs of changes to this block device. Let's just send that and not worry about the rest, because we can say the rest of it is all zeros. It compresses really well. And even what you are sending can be compressed. I was using LZ4 because that's the standard compression. It's nice and fast, pretty efficacious too. So even though I was transferring, theoretically, several terabytes of data, the actual time spent during the transfer was greatly reduced. I can't give all the credit to ZFS. I think some of the credit has to go to Hyper-V too. And just the setup of, hey, you use a fixed size drive for performance and to avoid fragmentation as you incrementally expand the hard drive file. But in the right systems, you can still get an incredible amount of savings, not in the amount of storage consumed necessarily, but possibly in the amount of data that you have to transfer around, because it can just compress it down and say, well, that's 160 gigs of zeros here, send a single zero, and then say, oh yeah, you repeat this for 160 gigs worth of data. Okay, that's really simple. So that was nice, that actually transferring the snapshots, I didn't have to transfer the full content of the snapshot. It just became, well, I guess the content of the snapshot rather than the size of the entire device. Another interesting thing when replicating encrypted ZVols. Yeah, there's a checkbox in the replication settings that says encryption. And if you look at the tooltip for it, it says this must be checked if you are transferring something that is using encryption. And that turned out to be the opposite for me. I needed that unchecked. Why does this work? How does it work? Why is it not the way that it's expected to be? I don't know. But I know that my source system, the ZVol, is already encrypted. It's already encrypted. I have the key for it because I saved that, because I back things up like any good netadmin should. All I want is a raw replication of the encrypted ZVol. When I tick the encryption box, it says, okay, do you want to create a key or use a passphrase to do this? And it's important to note that is creating a key. It's not an existing key. This encryption function seems to be it's going to take what you've got on the source system, wrap it into an encrypted wrapper, and send that and save that. So it could take an unencrypted data set and add encryption to it. And it has other options like, okay, do you want to store the encryption key for this in the sending device's database? No, I don't. It's already encrypted and the device knows what that is. Okay, do you want to save it to a temporary file on the receiving system so that you can download the key later? No, I don't really want that either. And when I was trying to do this with neither of those options, it just kept telling me there's no path specified. There's no path specified. And I'm like, I have a sending path, I have a receiving path, and I don't want this key going anywhere. Eventually, I just tried going through the replication setup and said, not encryption, no encryption. I'm just going to replicate it and then I'm going to examine it and see what I get. It came over fully encrypted. Great. I didn't need that encryption checkbox at all. And messing around with it consumed an awful lot of time as I was trying to figure out how to make this work. But it came over fully encrypted. It was locked because, of course, it was. The receiving system doesn't have the key yet. But I do have the key because, again, I backed it up. I'm a responsible network admin. I try to do those things. So I put the key into the receiving system. It unlocked the data set, or the ZVOL rather, and I was able to attach it to iSCSI. I connected it to my hosts, and all the data was there, accessible, readable. The virtual machines powered up, great. Everything moved over exactly as it was supposed to. But the checkbox that said, if you're using encryption on your sending system, you need to check this box, was completely wrong for me in my use case. It was, if it's already encrypted on your source system, don't check this because you don't need to add a second layer of encryption to it. Just put it through. Okay, cool. I managed it. There's still a couple things post-migration that I need to look into, and I'm going to have to call TrueNAS next week to say, hey, so there's this thing where I can only connect my iSCSI initiators to the A controller on this HA unit. I can't actually create connections to the B controller. I don't know why. It worked fine on the core-based version of Enterprise. Why it no work on the scale-based version of Enterprise? This should not be. I have a Lua enabled on both systems. That shouldn't be a problem. I have all the IPs set up on both systems. That shouldn't be the problem. What gives? We'll have to figure that out and figure out what's going on with that. But for the most part, the migration went well. And hey, now I have more knowledge on how these systems work and what I can do next time. So yeah, it's been a good learning experience, and I'm now a lot more comfortable with doing the ZFS replication because before this, I'd never done that. I'd never needed to set up ZFS replication between two different systems. Now I have a better idea of how it works, and that'll help me going forward. There's a lot of good things about increasing your own abilities and adding new skills for a network admin, and that's true for everybody as well. Going through life, just keep adding more skills. It's a good thing. But okay, yeah. So hopefully you have found that interesting. Maybe there's been some tidbits in there that are going to be useful for you. Again, if you do want to see me actually demonstrate some of this process, let me know, because I can put together a demo environment. I considered actually demonstrating some of this in a live environment, but there's way too much stuff going on there, and I mean, customer may or may not be happy about, oh yeah, we're doing all of this stuff, and conversely, it's honestly a lot to blur all of it out sometimes, and it might make it less clear. So if people want me to demonstrate this, I'm going to put together a proper demo environment so that we can just see what's going on fully clearly and without any extraneous stuff in the way. But if that's something you want to see, let me know down in the comments section. If there are other things that you want to hear me talk about or things that you want to see me demonstrate, feel free to let me know that too, because I do take that into account. So it's right down there in the comments section. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. I am your next door net admin, and we will see you next time.